murdered 4 decades ago has been found alive.
I'm excited to announce that baby Holly has been located, alive and well 42 years later.
The stunning announcement made in Texas, where Tina Gale and Harold Dean Klaus were found dead in a wooded area back in 1981. But the couple's baby daughter, Holly, was nowhere to be found. At the time, police could not identify the couple, who had just moved to the Houston area from Florida. But last year, through genetic genealogy, authorities identified the remains and notified their families.
Oh my goodness. I know you from your picture.
It's an embrace more than 40 years in the making.
I love you. Thank you for all your prayers.
Donna Casasanta is living an answered prayer. At long last, reunited in person with her granddaughter Holly, who was just a baby in 1981 when she and her parents, Dean and Tina Lynn Klaus, vanished without a trace.
God kept me safe and protected all these years, and I just want you to know that. We never give up. No, never give up. God never gives up on us.
For 4 decades, 2 nameless concrete slabs in a lonely Texas cemetery were the only markers of a chilling, unsolved mystery. The victims were a young husband and his teenage wife, their identities entirely erased from the world. But what investigators completely missed at the time was that the couple hadn't been traveling alone. They had an infant daughter who vanished without a single trace. 42 years later, cold case detectives finally tracked down that missing baby working a regular shift at a local fast food drive-thru, entirely unaware of her own tragic origin. The dark secrets hiding in her past are terrifying. No one could have predicted what happened next. The chilling breeze of a late autumn evening swept through the quiet streets of Yuma, Arizona. It was the 8th of November, 1980, and inside the Seventh-day Adventist Church, the atmosphere was peaceful, wrapped in the stillness of a typical weekend night. But that fragile silence was about to be shattered in a way no one could have anticipated. Pastor Philip McGoldrick was finishing up his evening duties when a sudden, frantic knocking echoed from the back door. It wasn't the polite, hesitant tap of a lingering parishioner. It was urgent, almost desperate, piercing through the quiet halls. When Pastor McGoldrick turned the lock and pulled the heavy wooden door open, what he saw standing in the shadows defied all logic. 2 women stood before him on the cold concrete step. They were dressed entirely in long, flowing white robes, their feet completely bare despite the biting November chill. But it wasn't their ghostly, archaic attire that made the pastor freeze in his tracks. It was what one of the women was clutching tightly to her chest. Carefully wrapped in a blanket was an infant, a baby girl no older than 8 or 9 months, looking up at the strangers with wide, innocent eyes. The women were calm, unnervingly composed, contrasting sharply with the urgency of their arrival. Before the pastor could fully process the bizarre scene unfolding on his own church steps, one of the Barefoot women stepped forward and extended her arms, offering the fragile child to him.
They looked like they just walked right out of the Bible. I had never seen anybody like that in my whole life, never.
One of them was holding a baby, probably about 8 or 9 months.
They said, we need somebody to take care of a baby.
It was a shock for sure.
Pastor McGoldrick, stunned and struggling to find the right words to make sense of the situation, instinctively reached out and took the small bundle into his arms. He looked at the women, searching their faces for a hint of distress, a trace of a mother's heartbreak, or any sign of regret, but he found absolutely nothing. "How can I help you?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly as he held the infant. "What is this child's name?" The woman simply looked at him and replied softly, "Her name is Holly." Along with the baby, the strange visitors handed over a few crumpled, handwritten documents. The papers were a crude but clear declaration of intent. They were voluntarily relinquishing all custody and parental rights. Their reasoning, written plainly on the page, was that their nomadic, wandering lifestyle made it impossible to raise a child. And just like that, without another word or a backward glance, the 2 women turned around and vanished into the dark night, leaving the pastor standing alone under the porch light. As the sound of their bare footsteps faded into the distance, a profound sense of unease washed over him. 1,000 questions raced through his mind. What kind of mother gives away her flesh and blood so abruptly, handing off her baby to total strangers in the dead of night? Was this a desperate act of love to protect the child from a terrifying reality they couldn't escape? Or was there a far darker, more sinister reason these women were so eager to leave her behind? Holding little Holly close to keep her warm, Pastor McGoldrick had absolutely no idea who this child truly was. Little did he know, the innocent baby looking up at him was the center of a blood-chilling puzzle, and her sudden arrival on his doorstep was just the opening chapter of a haunting, 4-decade mystery that was only just beginning. While a mysterious baby was being handed over to a stranger in the deserts of Arizona, another terrifying chapter was quietly unfolding on the opposite side of the country. In late 1980, the agonizing, suffocating silence in Volusia County, Florida, was finally broken by a ringing telephone. For Donna, Dean Klaus's mother, every passing day without a word from her son or her daughter-in-law had felt like an absolute nightmare. But the voice on the other end of the line didn't belong to Dean. It was a woman who introduced herself only as Sister Susan. Speaking with an unsettling, rehearsed calmness, she claimed to be calling all the way from Los Angeles. Sister Susan told Donna that she was in possession of Dean's 1,978 maroon AMC Concorde and offered to drive the vehicle back to Florida on the strict condition that Donna pay a hefty travel fee upon their arrival. Desperate for any connection to her missing son, Donna agreed. The meetup was set for the dead of night at the sprawling, dimly lit parking lot of the Daytona Speedway. When Donna arrived, flanked by a few trusted friends for safety, the eerie Florida air felt heavy. Out of the dark shadows of the massive racetrack, 3 women emerged. Just like the mysterious figures at the church in Arizona, they were draped in long, flowing white robes, walking with an unnatural, synchronized calm that immediately set off alarm bells. Donna's maternal instinct screamed that something was fundamentally wrong. Stepping forward, she confronted the apparent leader of the bizarre trio. "Where are my son and Tina? Why do you have this car?" Donna demanded, her voice shaking with a heavy mix of fear and desperation. Sister Susan didn't flinch. With a cold, emotionless stare, she delivered a message that would haunt the family for decades. "Dean and Tina have joined our group," she stated flatly. "They have given up all their possessions and do not want to be in contact with their family anymore. I gotta be honest with you, this part really makes my blood boil when you realize how chillingly calculated this was. Imagine standing in a dark, empty parking lot, staring into the cold eyes of a stranger, and being told your own children have just erased you from their universe. I'm curious, how would you feel if you were in Donna's shoes right then? Drop your take in the comments, because this entire interaction screams that a sinister trap had already been sprung." After handing over the keys and pocketing the cash, the 3 women turned and melted back into the dark night, disappearing as quickly as they came. But the true nightmare was only just beginning. When Donna finally opened the heavy doors of the maroon vehicle, hoping to find a forgotten jacket, a pacifier, or any sign of her loved ones, she was met with a blood-chilling sight. The car wasn't just empty, it was pristine. It had been meticulously, aggressively wiped down. There were no fingerprints on the dashboard, no stray hairs on the seats, no loose change in the console. Every single trace of Dean, Tina, and baby Holly had been surgically scrubbed away. This wasn't a simple return of a borrowed vehicle, it was a ghost ship. The flawless, sterile interior sent a devastating wave of dread crashing over Donna. What no one knew was that this spotless car was silently hiding a horrifying truth, one that would take over 40 years to finally uncover. Fast forward 4 agonizing decades. The calendar turns to June 2022. The chilling mysteries of barefoot women and spotless maroon cars felt like ghosts trapped in a forgotten era. In a quiet town in Oklahoma, a 42-year-old woman named Holly Marie was living a completely normal, unassuming life. She was a hardworking mother of 5 and a proud grandmother. She spent her days raising her family, paying bills, and working her shifts at a local fast food restaurant. She always knew she was adopted, but she grew up believing her biological parents simply couldn't care for her and handed her over to give her a better life. Little did she know, her entire existence was the missing cornerstone to one of the most devastating cold cases in American history. It was just another routine day at the restaurant. The lunch rush had settled, and the familiar, mundane hum of the kitchen filled the air. But then, a vehicle pulled up to the drive-through window. The people inside weren't there to place a food order. They were seasoned cold case investigators from the Texas Attorney General's office, and they had just spent months tracking a genetic ghost across state lines. When the drive-through window slid open, an investigator leaned forward, his expression dead serious. "Is Holly here?" he asked, his eyes scanning the interior of the restaurant. Holly stepped up to the window, wiping her hands, completely unaware that the next few seconds would shatter her reality forever. "Yes, that's me," she replied, a knot of confusion instantly forming in her stomach. "What's going on?" The investigator looked at her with a heavy mix of empathy and resolve. "We are from the Texas Attorney General's office. We have a very long and important story about your life that we need to share with you." This is where the story takes a profoundly emotional turn. Imagine standing in the middle of your workplace, wearing your daily uniform, surrounded by the ordinary details of a regular shift, only to be told that you are the subject of a nationwide mystery. You aren't just an adoptee, you are baby Holly. For over 40 years, you had been missing in plain sight, living a life completely detached from the tragedy of your own birth. What struck me the most was the unimaginable psychological weight of that exact moment. I couldn't stop thinking about how her heart must have dropped into her stomach. In the blink of an eye, the foundational truths of her identity were completely rewritten. She suddenly learned that desperate families had been praying and searching for her since she was an infant. But with that miraculous revelation came a devastating, blood-chilling realization. If she was the missing baby, what had happened to the young parents who brought her into this world? The nightmare was only just beginning for Holly, as she was about to learn the horrifying answer, an answer that had been quietly buried beneath the dirt and shadows of a remote Texas forest. To understand the devastating reality of Holly's past, we have to rewind the clock. The horrifying truth is, long before those detectives arrived at that drive-through window in Oklahoma, the answers were already waiting in the cold, unyielding earth of Texas. It was January 1981. In a heavily wooded, remote area on the desolate fringes of Houston, a bitter winter wind swept through the dense vegetation. It was an incredibly isolated place, far removed from the warmth and noise of the city. In this lonely, quiet expanse, a devastating discovery was made. The remains of a young man and a young woman were found hidden among the trees, shrouded in the silence of the forest. When investigators arrived at the somber scene, the profound gravity of the tragedy settled over them. Forensic analysis quickly determined that the young couple had been victims of a homicide, their lives abruptly stolen by deliberate acts of violence. But as detectives carefully searched the area, hoping to find a name to attach to the victims, they found absolutely nothing. There were no wallets left behind, no identification cards, and no personal belongings that could tell the world who these people were. Even their dental records, carefully documented by the medical examiner, led to agonizing dead ends. In the early 1980s, without the aid of DNA databases, digital records, or interconnected national systems, cross-referencing missing persons was an incredibly frustrating task. Paper files sat silently in cabinets across different states, gathering dust. A desperate family in Florida could be relentlessly searching for their loved ones, while a police department in Texas held the tragic answer, and the two pieces of the puzzle would simply never connect. With all leads exhausted and no family coming forward, the case slowly went cold. The young couple was eventually laid to rest in a quiet county cemetery, surrounded by hundreds of other forgotten souls. Instead of beautifully carved headstones etched with loving messages from their parents, they were given plain, identical concrete markers. They were officially buried as John Doe and Jane Doe. I gotta be honest with you, this part is just absolutely heartbreaking. I couldn't stop thinking about the profound isolation of that burial. These were two young people who had names, who had a family, who had a beautiful baby girl. Yet they were left to rest in complete anonymity for over 40 years. They were entirely stripped of their identities and their history, swallowed whole by the heartbreaking limitations of the era's filing systems. It makes you pause and wonder about the fragile nature of who we are. Do you think an identity could be forgotten so easily for decades? How does an entire existence just slip through the cracks of the system? Drop your take in the comments, because the tragedy of these silent markers is something that is truly hard to shake. But what no one knew was that those two concrete stones were not the end of their story. Science was finally about to catch up with the past. For 40 years, the silent frontier of the Texas woods kept its tragic secret hidden. But what no one knew was that time wasn't just erasing the past, it was quietly advancing the technology needed to finally uncover it. In 2021, a monumental shift occurred. The Texas Attorney General's Cold Case Unit decided to revisit the mystery of the unidentified couple. Teaming up with forensic genetic genealogists, investigators utilized modern DNA analysis that was completely unimaginable back in 1981. They carefully extracted genetic profiles from the stored evidence and began the painstaking, complex process of rebuilding family trees. They traced microscopic threads of DNA across decades and state lines, searching for a single connection. Finally, the intricate genetic web converged on an undeniable point: a family residing in Florida. The results were definitive, and the nameless concrete slabs were finally shattered by the truth. John Doe was Harold Dean Klaus, a young husband who was just 21 years old. Jane Doe was his teenage wife, Tina Gale Klaus, only 17. I gotta be honest with you, giving a name back to an unidentified victim after 4 long decades is an incredible triumph. It brings a profound, albeit devastating, sense of closure to families who have spent countless sleepless nights staring at the ceiling, wondering what happened to their loved ones. But this is where the story takes a dark and unimaginable turn. When investigators officially contacted the Klaus family in Florida to deliver the heavy news of Dean and Tina's fate, the family was heartbroken. But through their overwhelming grief, they asked a question that made the detectives' blood run ice cold. Where is the baby? The investigators were absolutely stunned. Dean and Tina hadn't left Florida alone. When they vanished into the shadows of 1980, they had been fiercely protecting their infant daughter, a little girl named Holly. According to the police reports, there was no trace of a child at the original crime scene. No blanket, no clothing, absolutely nothing. The realization was chilling. An infant had completely vanished without a single trace, entirely unaccounted for in any official record for 40 years. The Texas investigators immediately partnered with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Utilizing advanced forensic software, experts frantically worked to construct an age progression image. They had the near impossible task of visualizing what a missing baby from 1981 would look like as a 42-year-old woman today. The nightmare was no longer just about 2 young lives stolen in the woods. It had suddenly transformed into a frantic, high-stakes hunt for a genetic ghost. The chase was officially on, and the authorities were determined to track down any digital or paper trail left behind. But the haunting question remained: was baby Holly still out there, living a completely, entirely different life she knew nothing about, or had she met the same tragic end as her parents? As investigators pieced together the shattered timeline of Dean and Tina Klaus, a sinister shadow began to loom over the investigation. A nomadic religious group known as the Christ family, led by a deeply manipulative individual with a documented history of severe criminal behavior, the group operated under incredibly rigid and terrifying doctrines. To prove their absolute devotion, members were forced to surrender all worldly possessions. But the rules went much further into the extreme. Men and women were strictly forbidden from living together. And chillingly, followers were heavily pressured to abandon their own children to achieve supposed spiritual purity. At first glance, it seemed Dean and Tina had simply fallen prey to these twisted beliefs, willingly walking away from their families to wander the country. But when experts took a hard look at the forensic data and the physical evidence left behind, the narrative completely fractured. The horrifying truth is, the crime scene in the Texas woods told a vastly different story than what the group's followers claimed. First, the victims were found side by side. Despite the group's strict mandate that males and females must be entirely separated at all times, Dean and Tina were together in their final moments. Secondly, they were not wearing the mandatory long white robes that define the group's members. Instead, they were found dressed in normal, everyday street clothes. Then came the paper trail. Financial records revealed that shortly before their disappearance, Dean had rented an apartment in Louisville, Texas. But he didn't use his own identity. He leased the property under his father's name. I gotta be honest with you, when you stack all these logical pieces together, it completely changes how you view this tragedy. Dean wasn't just moving to a new city, he was actively hiding. He was trying to erase his footprint. What do you guys make of this? Does this make your blood boil too? Realizing they were likely terrified and looking over their shoulders every single second. Let me know below what stands out to you most about these hidden clues. This is where the story takes a profoundly devastating turn. Looking at the anomalies, investigators formulated a heartbreaking theory. Dean and Tina weren't loyal followers blindly walking into the desert. They were desperately trying to escape. They had recognized the sheer danger of the group and were orchestrating a frantic breakaway to protect their young family. They were running for their lives. And suddenly, that chilling night at the Arizona church makes agonizing sense. For decades, the narrative was that a brainwashed mother callously surrendered her infant. But looking through the lens of their escape, it wasn't abandonment at all. It was an act of absolute, desperate love. Knowing they were likely being pursued across state lines, Tina realized the journey was becoming incredibly dangerous. She made the unimaginable, gut-wrenching choice to leave her baby in a safe, public sanctuary, hoping to shield Holly from the violent storm that was rapidly closing in on them. She handed her child to a total stranger, hoping that one day she could come back for her. It was a mother's ultimate sacrifice. She gave away her child so her child could live. Tragically, their escape attempt failed, culminating in the horrific ambush in the Texas woods. But their final, desperate gamble worked. Baby Holly was safe, completely hidden from the people who had hunted her parents down. The nightmare was over for the infant, but the quest for justice was only just beginning. After 42 years of suffocating silence and agonizing questions, the fractured pieces of the Klaus family were finally coming back together. In June 2022, shortly after the DNA bombshell confirmed her true identity, a deeply emotional reunion was carefully arranged. It began across a digital screen, a virtual meeting, bridging the massive geographic and temporal gap between Oklahoma and Florida. For the very first time, Donna and her surviving daughters looked into the eyes of the little girl they feared had perished decades ago. The moment was completely overwhelming. Tears of pure joy flowed freely as they saw Dean's familiar smile and Tina's soft, vibrant features staring back at them through Holly. Just days later, that digital connection transformed into an incredibly powerful, tear-filled in-person embrace. During that quiet, private gathering, the family handed Holly pieces of her stolen history. They showed her cherished wedding photographs of Dean and Tina, capturing a deeply in love young couple full of life and hope for the future. But the most devastatingly beautiful gift was a delicate, well-worn baby book. Inside those fragile pages were handwritten notes, carefully penned by her biological mother, Tina. The teenage mother had meticulously recorded every precious milestone, the exact day little Holly learned to crawl, the first time she babbled a word, and all the quiet, undocumented moments of a mother's boundless love. I couldn't stop thinking about how monumental this discovery was for her. For her entire life, Holly had to carry the heavy, silent assumption that her parents had simply walked away, giving her up to strangers. But holding that baby book changed absolutely everything. The tragedy of their murders was devastating, but the revelation brought a profound, overwhelming psychological relief. Holly finally understood the undeniable truth. She was never abandoned. She was deeply, fiercely loved. Her parents had fought to keep her, and Tina's last desperate act of handing her over at the church was to shield her from the violent nightmare that ultimately claimed their lives. While the investigation into the horrific murders in the Texas woods remains highly active, and authorities are still relentlessly hunting down the individuals responsible, a massive measure of justice has already been won. The system may have failed them in the 1980s, but modern science fought back. Dean and Tina Klaus are no longer nameless, forgotten victims buried under cold, anonymous concrete markers. Their true identities have been respectfully restored, their tragic story has been told, and most importantly, the daughter they died protecting is alive, safe, and surrounded by a family who never, ever gave up hope. What do you guys think? Does this ending bring you any sense of relief after all the darkness this family had to endure? Finally, after more than 40 years of relentless prayers, the family was able to find each other and begin the long, peaceful journey of healing. I'll keep digging if there's more to uncover on the suspect. Thanks for watching, and for all the comments you guys make this worth it.